Recently I was flying and I took a small collapse on my Ozone Viper XC. Let's talk about it. A couple of nights ago, I went flying in the evening time when there was a nice breeze blowing straight up this mountain. Now, with that nice breeze came some nice ridge lift and, in the wrong spots, a little bit of rotor. I flew into the wrong location at this time. I was going to turn around. I kind of knew it was going to be about right there, and boom, it bit me just a little bit. Whenever you encounter turbulence, a good rule of thumb that I follow is to quickly identify what type of turbulence you are in. This is something I do beyond just say this situation, but anytime I'm flying in turbulence, I like to identify what is it that I'm experiencing. There are really 5 main types of turbulence. Number 1 is thermal activity. That is the pockets of hot rising air that occur in the mid-time of the day, starting around 10 a.m. and ending around 5 or 6 p.m. Second type is wind shear. That is basically highways of wind as you climb in altitude, where you have wind going from one direction to wind going the other direction. Number 3 is rotor, like I encountered in this situation where I'm flying behind an object or on the leeward side of an object. The twirling, whirling, spinning air on that downwind side or the leeward side is very turbulent. Number 4 is gust fronts. That is a front of wind in which is increasing in speed and very unstable. Number 5 is wake. That is the trail left behind by a glider slicing through the air, similar to a boat. Now, I want to define turbulence just a little bit further in a really basic way. Turbulence is essentially wind changing in direction or speed. So if wind is essentially going from one direction at 4 miles an hour and switches to the other direction at 6 miles an hour, that is going to be a very turbulent experience. Looping that all back into this situation. As I am flying up in this mountain and I am ridge soaring this ridge, which was one of the most fun things I've done in the last while. I've dreamt about it for years and I just got lucky enough this day to do it. I encountered rotor. Now, the reason that identifying turbulence is kind of important is because if you identify it, you identify whether this is going to be something you will battle for a minute, an hour, a second, or more. This is also a way to identify if you're in extremely risky turbulence or if you're in something more mild. Rotor is probably the most intense, dangerous turbulence we can encounter. So it is important, and you should know before you're in rotor, to identify rotor so you know what you're getting yourself into and know how to avoid it. I've made videos in the past discussing how to identify where rotor is. I'd highly encourage you go look at it. Now that we've kind of identified that, the reason I wanted to point out turbulence and the types quickly is so that you can kind of work on building a tolerance to it. There are certain turbulences in which you don't need to be concerned about nearly as much. Thermals, wind shear to a certain degree, front to a certain degree, those are a little bit more intense. Wake, we tend not to have to worry about another paramotor's wake. Obviously, a helicopter wake or a 747 is a different story. Rotor, the less wind, the less intense, the more wind, the more intense. So I like to identify what that turbulence is that I am experiencing so that I kind of know what I'm battling. Stuff that's less intense, I don't need to be as concerned or worried about. Now, looping back to this collapse and kind of bringing it full circle, I want to talk about my reaction in this collapse and why there's a few things you should know about this. Number 1, I did not over control. A few months back, I made a video of a guy in Iceland who spun his glider from a collapse. He went into the rotor of a mountain, he took a big collapse, and he ended up spinning the glider, in which he then continued to spin and stall all the way down to the ground. Recovering from a stall is way more difficult, requires much more altitude and a lot more pilot skill to recover than a collapse. If you were to choose between recovering from a stall or recovering from a collapse, you would choose to recover from a collapse. A collapse is often much more tame in its recovery, and even if most of the glider is not flying, aka collapse, the remaining part of the glider is still going to be flying as normal. A spin or a stall is you are now coming down in a spin or a stall and you need to recover from a spin or a stall. A collapse you can recover at much lower altitudes. You do not need as much time to recover from a collapse as you do from a stall. If you're under 100 feet and you take a stall, there's a slim likelihood that even an experienced pilot is going to have enough altitude to recover and regain flat and level flight, because you may be able to recover, but it's going to need need to surge forward to regain energy and wind that it has now just lost. So it's going to shoot, and you will need time and altitude for that shoot to recover and round out. A collapse, there's still air in there to a degree, so it doesn't need as much time. It's going to reopen more quickly, less pilot intervention, and it needs less altitude to recover. So not over controlling in a collapse is important, so you do not put yourself into a spin or a stall. Had I stalled or spun, which was unlikely based on the level of turbulence, in this situation by over controlling, applying too much brake, I now am going to be coming down. I'm not very high off that ridge line. My reserve is probably not going to open if I throw it. It's not enough time. A collapse, I can fly 50% of the glider all the way down to the ground, may have a slightly uncomfortable landing, but I will walk away from it. So you don't want to overdo. A couple of the things that you're going to notice as I start to go into this turbulence is that my hands drop and they go back up. You do not see my hands just continue to sink down into more and more and more and more brake. I actually need to give air back to the glider when I can. You're kind of doing a give and take. You are taking energy out when you apply those brakes to prevent the glider from overflying or from collapsing. You then need to give that brake back so the glider can refill with air so that you can take that back in the case that you need to apply that brake again. When the glider actually collapsed, what you will notice with my brake is my hand went back up. So if we break down the moment in which the collapse actually happened, you will watch my hand go down to catch the glider as it surges forward to collapse. As soon as it collapses, the lack of pressure my hand is feeling instinctually puts my hand back up. I instinctually put my hand back up. As soon as the glider reopens and the glider starts to shoot forward to regain energy, I catch that shoot and I prevent it from collapsing again. So it's a perfect example of go to catch the glider, apply the brake. I didn't apply enough, which is why it collapsed. As soon as it does collapse, the hand goes back up. As soon as it's recovered and re-shooting, aka it's surging, I go back down to prevent that surge from resurging. Now, that sounds like a lot, and it sounds difficult to learn and so many moving pieces. I have good news for you. The skill that you learn on the ground, kiting, is the same skill that you use up here. So when you're on the ground kiting and your wing takes, say, a tip collapse, instead of building the habit of slamming the brake to the side that collapsed or hammering and pumping the brake to the side that collapsed, you simply fly the side that's open. The hand to the collapsed side goes up. As soon as it reopens, you apply brake if needed to catch it from surging. The motion, the feeling, the inputs are all the same. What's different is one time you're falling down through the sky, the other time you are standing on the ground. So I much prefer to learn this on the ground, and this is something we teach during our 10-day beginner training, is tying how the skill set you're learning here on the ground translates to the skill set you have in the sky. So one of the things that we do is we intentionally collapse the glider. When the wing collapses, the hand needs to go up to prevent the wing from stalling, because stalling is not as easily recoverable as collapsing. So I'd rather recover a collapse. Hands go up. Once the glider reopens and shoots, hands go down. It's the same on the ground. That feeling is the same on the ground. Remember me mentioning that pressure, right? When the wing shot forward, my hand sank down. It's heavily loaded. It's moving. I'm trying to prevent it. As soon as it goes light and squishy, the pressure goes light because the glider collapses. My hand instinctually goes back up because on the ground, when that wing goes light and squishy, it means it's collapsed. My hand goes up. You see the correlation here. When something happens on the ground, it happens in the sky. It's the same thing. It's the same feeling. So it's extremely important if you are a pilot, or if you are going to become a pilot and you are going to a training school or looking to get into this, that you learn how to control that glider on the ground, that you learn that glider control, and that you understand how that glider control on the ground translates to active piloting and flying the glider in the sky. It is well known in the paragliding community and in the paramotoring community that the guys that are really good pilots in the air are really good pilots on the ground. If you do not feel fully confident in your ability to keep control of that glider on the ground, prevent the collapses, which is the first step is preventing those collapses, and the second step is recovering those collapses, then I encourage you to get more time on the ground. Now, we've talked a little bit about the collapses and wanting to recover from a collapse instead of a stall. The best thing is to prevent the collapse from happening in the first place. And that is also a skill you learn on the ground. So while you are kiting, if the glider does surge forward, like it wants to overfly you and frontal and collapse down on top of your head, that feeling of that surge where all of of a sudden the risers are getting heavy, there's more loading, and it starts shooting forward towards your face or in front of you if you're forward kiting, and the hands instinctually dropping down to prevent that. So that same surge is the same surge you feel in the sky. Preventing the collapse is the best thing. Recovering a collapse is the second. Recovering a stall is third. So if you can prevent the collapse, that is best. As that pressure starts to go and it starts to get light, you try and catch the wing. If you are unable to catch the wing, those hands go back up and then you wait for it to reopen and catch. So another example of this and how it translates to the sky. I was flying the Adventure Wingman, which is an 11-day cross-country flight through a bunch of states. I took 3 full frontals, and what you watch as these collapses happen, my hands go down to catch the glider as it surges forward. I failed to catch the glider because my arms hit the bags on the side of my paramotor full of camping equipment and they didn't go down beyond, say, 4-6 inches. I failed to catch. As soon as I note it collapsed again, my hands went back up to 0 brake. It surged again, hands went down to catch the second surge. I failed to catch the second surge because my arms hit the bags again. Hands went back up, glider reopened, shot forward a third time, hands went down past the bags and caught the wing. So that same feeling that I get on the ground when that glider shoots forward and I go to catch it and it overflies, let's say, and those hands go back up to let the glider reopen and then start flying again. On the ground, that same feeling is the same feeling that you get in the sky. So one of the things that's really important for us at our training school is not allowing bad habit. The bad habit that is really important for me is that when the glider does collapse, the hands do not instinctually hammer brake. Because looping back to that video in Iceland that I reviewed back in December, the pilot's hands instinctually hammered brake, which is something you can get away with on the ground. You can hammer the brake and the wing falls, and so what? You inflate it again. Doesn't matter if you don't see the correlation, but having that bad habit of hammering brake when the wing does collapse means you'll have that bad habit in the sky. And now if your wing does collapse, you're hammering brake and you're recovering from stalls and spins, which is far more dynamic, needs more altitude and more skill. So the goal of this video, I'm hopeful that you can see some of the correlations between the ground kiting, ground handling, the importance of ground handling, and how it translates to the sky. I know you hear about it, people talk about it, I preach about it, I'm sure other people preach about it. I'm hoping that this video paints a bit of a picture of how the ground handling skills, how your ability to prevent and recover collapses while kiting translates to your ability to prevent and recover collapses while flying. If you are interested in learning how to fly these beautiful aircrafts, we do run a 10-day training course here in Salt Lake City, Utah, where we teach this alongside with all of the other things that you need to know about flying a paramotor. Please visit backcountryppg.com. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much. Signing off.